Okay, I'm here, live, using Socratic interviewing in your personal life. Interviewed by Mance on his podcast. You want to start your
Hey, Jen.
questions?
Yeah, Jen, how are you doing this evening?
Excellent. Hit me with your
Well,
first question.
how did you come up with this? How did you come up with this method of asking questions?
Well, when I was very young, say 10 years old or whatever, I realized that you could win an argument by catching someone in a contradiction. And like most 10-year-olds, I like to win. So I, I started using that a little bit there. But my purpose was to win the argument. And then when I went to college, which I went to pretty young, I read the dialogues by Plato, where Socrates does the very circuitous, how do you say that word? Circuitous? Very roundabout, long way of getting a person to contradict themselves when he was Socratically interviewing his disciples. And I thought to myself in college, wow, that's really cool. I'd like to do that. So I put that in the back of my mind, and I had by then done a lot of arguing and realized that arguing was not very effective. You hardly ever change anyone's mind. So I started to try to do the Socratic interviewing in a primitive, limited style. When I did my first, by the time I did my first TV show, which was called What is Your Philosophy of Life? That's all I did. I did a Socratic interview of politicians and academics and journalists. So I guess that's the history. The, the thing that I really want to get into um, is answering that question of why you should use Socratic interviewing in your personal life.
So
And
go right ahead.
that okay? Great. So
Yeah.
here's the thing. In life, we have disagreements with our partners, with our friends, with our wives, with uh, whoever, you know. And there's really, as I see it, three options. You can do what a lot of people do which is this, I'll start with the worst option. It's what a lot of people do on the internet. They insult the other person. Oh, you're such a moron. and, and so that's the worst thing you can do. The second thing, and they usually do that on the internet because they're not going to get punched. anyway, anyway, the second worst thing is what I used to do when I was a kid and a young man, which was argue. So if somebody says something and you disagree, it's very easy. You know why you disagree, so you say, well, you're wrong because of A, B, C. And then they say, no, you're the one that's wrong because X, Y, Z. And then you go back and forth, and people aren't listening to each other, and they're talking past each other. So with that context, I am positing the idea that your best option is to Socratically interview the other person and let them Socratically interview you. And that's what I'm pushing in this interview here. That the first reason why you want to do that is because I realized that a lot of apparent disagreements are not really disagreements, they're just misunderstandings. So you could argue with someone, like happened to me when I was younger, for an hour or half an hour, and then at the end of all that, you say, "Oh, is that what you mean? Oh, I thought you meant this other thing." Well, why the hell didn't you ask this clear question to make sure what I meant? It's what the other person was saying, and well, I guess you're right. So that's the first thing. The first benefit of doing a Socratic interview is you eliminate just misunderstandings. So a lot of the arguing is eliminating misunderstandings. The second thing about why Socratic interviewing is better than arguing, because those are the two that are competing, is that when you do a Socratic interview, you are not attacking the other person. It's not antagonistic, because you're not saying you're wrong. When you start out in a discussion and the first thing you say is you're wrong, that's antagonistic. Instead of you say, what do you mean by this? So that's kind of more neutral, right? So it doesn't create the antagonism that happens often in discussions and ruins the discussion. The emotional reaction between the two parties of fighting with each other. So I think you have a better chance of having a good, even keeled discussion by just doing a Socratic interview. Then let's suppose you have a real disagreement and you find out what they mean, and you can, I think, lead a person like Socrates did to a contradiction in their thinking by asking them questions. Once you know what their position is, you should know, and yours is the opposite, you should know what premises your position is based on. So you can start to find out where you and the other person disagree. And you go premise by premise. Do you agree with this? Do you agree with that? Oh, you don't agree with one of these premises. Well, then the next thing to do is, what facts support your premise? So, do you think this is a fact? Because I saw it with my own eyes. Do you think that's a fact? And then if they say, oh gosh, I wasn't aware of that fact, or let me check to see if that's a fact, well, then maybe you're on the road to persuading them. So that is what you need to do in order to persuade a person. Also, you can lead them to a contradiction in their thinking, which, if they're rational, they'll realize, well, they're necessarily mistaken. So that would be my pitch for using Socratic interviewing in your life. What do you think?
So it's not confrontational, but from what I've seen of some of your interviews, when people get trapped in their contradictions, they have a tendency to get confrontational, especially when you've talked to politicians. So, how do you pull them? I mean, okay, forget the politicians. You know that they don't want to be found out. They're not going to admit to their contradictions very rarely. In your personal life, if a person starts becoming inflamed by what you've exposed, how have you dealt with that?
Well, I'm glad you yourself already regarding politicians. They have a reputation at stake. They think that their reputation will be damaged if a contradiction is revealed, so they get angry about that because you're ruining their merchandise. So that's true. But I have interviewed politicians and journalists who have come around and said, okay, I was mistaken. Like, I interviewed Mike Wallace, and he said, okay, I was wrong. So I said, well, that was my point. Let's go to the next thing. Anyway, those don't happen as often, and they don't get as much play, but that can happen. Now, in your personal life, you have an advantage where you can use a delay of time, so you can ask them the question and you get to the premise that you disagree on, and you give them the fact, and then they say, you need some time? Okay. It doesn't have to be in one sitting. The Socratic interview can be slow motion. You can, little by little, edge the person in the right direction. And I think, you should expose yourself to Socratic interviewing to check your own thinking, and let somebody with a different opinion check to see if your thinking is sound or not. If they are any good at Socratic interviewing, it's a good exercise. Often what happens is that they just get frustrated, in my experience, if you just disagree and you find out why you disagree, and they just get frustrated or angry or whatever. But for yourself, you've gone through a necessary screening of your thinking. I think, if you are an intellectual coward and you aren't willing to put your thinking out there, you never will have true confidence in your thinking, because it hasn't been tested. It's like a boxer. If he hasn't got in the ring with anyone and didn't beat anyone, he's not going to have real confidence. So the way you get real confidence is by exposing yourself. And also, it can happen that the other person knows something you don't know, and it teaches you something and you learn something, so you win either way. It's a win-win situation. A good intellectual discussion should always be win-win, because either you become clear that you were right, that the other person can't lay a glove on you, or they did, and you got to go home and fix your nose because it's busted. and you can learn from that and watch out for the left hook. Anyway, I think there's a lot of advantage to doing this. And sometimes, say, maybe in your personal life, you might start I just got a message here from someone that says, "You are the man, Jan." I appreciate that's nice. I like those fans. I prefer compliments. Anyway, so I think it has all around quite a few benefits. It's a good way to, like, it's happened to me. A smart guy interviews you Socratically, and he brings up something that you hadn't thought of. You have to think it through and see. And you learn something that you were saying the idea in your mind was incorrect. You have to vary it, rephrase it, moderate it, change it to what's true. And that's how you learn more and more. I mean, so that's why I do Socratic I expose myself to being interviewed by people that disagree with me. I think it's real useful.
heard people say, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the Socratic method is to be able to answer questions with questions.
No, 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 no. That's that is evading. That's absolutely not Socratic interviewing, and that is, I think that's an old Jewish tradition of answering a question with a question. The Talmudic scholars I hear were experts at that. No, they don't want to answer your question. That if they don't answer your question, you can't lead them anywhere. They're evading the progression of your questions. No, in a Socratic interview, you should be responsive. Now, if you don't understand the question, you're not sure what they're asking, then you can ask to explain this. What do you mean by this term? What do you mean by the other term? And but then once you have clarified all of that, then you answer. You know people are really evading if they start with, well, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And then you explain it to them and they still don't answer. That's just a person evading, trying to get away from the progression that you're leading them, where you're leading them to. Or if a person says, when you ask them a question, it says, well, where are you leading with this question? It says, so you should ask them. In that case, is an exception to the rule. You answer that question with a question. You say, does where I'm leading determine how you answer the question? I thought you just answered the truth. What you thought was the truth. And so people use that as a way of evading. It's happened to me with politicians and journalists. Where are you leading with this question? Well, what the hell does that matter? Just answer what you think is the truth. So
Now, you've become, I think, the first video I ever saw, and it may be your most popular one, is the interview with Bernie Sanders.
actually,
Is
the
that
most
the one?
the most popular one is the one with Harry Reid. It has over it's 2.3 million. But
Okay,
but
okay.
the Bernie Sanders, since Harry Reid is out now, he's no longer senator. That's the one where I lead him to it. Here's another way of winning or exposing a politician. It's what I do in the case of Harry Reid. It's not that I catch him in a contradiction. I get him to say something that is so absurd that it exposes him to ridicule, and he's lost the argument. Reduction ad absurdum is what I think the way you say it in Latin. That's an old technique which is totally valid. In other words, assuming your premises, if you have to defend these premises, you have to say stupid things that everybody knows are stupid, fine, go ahead and do it. You're done. You didn't contradict yourself, that's right. But we know you don't have a leg to stand on.
Well, most of the questions and interviews that I've seen you do with politicians have to do with power, have to do with authority, and leading them down, like what you did with Bernie Sanders. You were basically asking him questions about, if an individual doesn't have a right to do this, how can that right be passed off to somebody else?
Right.
What in your background, your philosophy, your ideology, leads you to ask questions like that, where you're seemingly questioning authority, questioning taxes? What's your ideology that leads you to engage politicians as such?
Well, I'm an objectivist. And so I know that limited government is the optimum social organization. I know anarchists disagree with this, and that's why I debate with anarchists. And so in this case, well, Bernie Sanders, I led him to an absurd statement. which was you can delegate a right you do not have. So you see, obviously the truth is, in order to delegate a right, you have to have it. If you don't have it, you can't delegate it. And so that's a case of reduction ad absurdum. And that's how I exposed him in that interview. It didn't really get to more fundamentals, but that is enough. And by the way, I think that interview with Bernie Sanders is a good example of the value of perseverance. Because if you might not recall, but I do, that when I first asked him this question, he said, well, I answered that already. So, okay, so what was it? Well, I already answered. He kept saying he had answered. And then finally he said, well, do you mean this? Are you asking me this? No, I'm not asking you that. So now can you ask me to answer my question? In other words, he was trying to, and I had to do this like 4 or 5 times before he finally was open to answering my question responsively, answering what I asked. That's the whole point here. You gotta be responsive when you answer, and answer what they ask, and they should do the same.
Now, how do you gain access to these people? That was something I was wondering today when we were talking earlier. What credentials do you use to be able to get into a room with Bernie Sanders?
Well, that happened a long time ago. As I said, I had that TV show in Puerto Rico. That was, and I did interview some senators, and I had a demo tape so they could watch. I would say, it's through the years, things may have changed. Probably the answer in the Bernie Sanders case is a beautiful adulatory letter I sent him, where building him up, and they bought it. So in that case, we had scheduled two interviews, one on redistribution of wealth and one on minimum wage, I think. And I brought in my crew to his office, and my favorite question, after he got furious and didn't want to have anything to do with me, was my last question, which was, do you want to do the interview on minimum wage? No! Anyway.
Just a little more. Just stick it in his ribs just a little more.
Well, I don't know. That guy, Jan Helfeld, on the camera, he's got a lot of gall. I tell you. How dare you ask a question like that? But anyway, I get a kick out of it. By the way, I enjoy my own interviews. I get a kick out of myself. And another interesting, when you do these interviews on camera, is you get a clear insight into your soul, to who you are and to your character. There's no faking it. It's right there at the moment. You can see the reactions. You can see if the guy's a coward or what he does or how he reacts. There's no faking it. It's all there. And, to be frank and to compliment myself, I like what I see. Anyway, that could be disappointing as well, You might not like what you see, but I like what I see, so I'm okay with it.
Well, I think confidence is important. what they've done, and they won't be able to continue to improve.
Let me answer your
Because they,
question. Let me answer your question a little bit more about how you can get the interviews, because I've discussed it with agents, and it's an interesting question, and it's a question that I faced in my TV show in Puerto Rico. The the first thing is that the universe of interviewees is quite large, so you can have a high failure rate and still be successful. That's one fact. Another fact is that some people are careless. If they knew that you were going to Socratically interview them, they wouldn't do it. But they're a little bit careless and they're not careful. So that's another group that you will get from this large universe. Then you get the people that have seen your interviews, know Socratic interviewing, but say, I'm going to teach this fellow Jan Helfeld a thing or two. And then they sit down and we find out if they teach me or not. And so, because of these different reasons, you can get the interviews. It requires, perseverance and character. Through the years, I developed a lot of contacts and people in the business, and so that helped as well. So I guess that is a more complete answer to your question.
I think being a good interviewer, sometimes people will approach you. Now, if you're exposing them like you do, they're probably
They're
going to
not
want
going
to
to do
run
it.
as
Like,
far.
so for example, I interviewed a fellow, I think his name is Mark Anthony, and for Voice of America. He was happy to talk about anything. As soon as I I was actually pitching him the idea of Socratic interviewing, and when he found out what it was, and I asked him if he would like me to do a Socratic interview with him, he said, no, thank you. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. So that's an answer to a lot of people that say, but Jan, why aren't you more upfront and tell them what they're gonna be, encounter and what they're gonna be exposed to? Well, upfront means, you're gonna get like 90% less guests.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of sneakiness, I guess, for a good cause, for the cause of freedom. And let me say one more thing about that.
Sure.
It's a bit different with an individual. An individual is not a threat to you, assuming he's not a criminal, and he's not attacking you. But a politician that's taking away your freedom and violating your rights is. So I have a completely different rule with politicians and individuals. It's totally different. So that, jives with what we were saying before about, personal use. There, the individual is not making a claim to know things or to pass laws that you have to follow or anything else. So you have to have a different attitude.
Yeah, I don't have a problem being confrontational with the couple politicians that I've met. They're there's nothing good about them. Most of these politicians, and I interviewed a lobbyist, a gentleman who works for a very big lobbying firm in D.C., and he basically revealed that they care nothing about us. They get up there, even the ones that go up there with the best of intentions are almost immediately corrupted.
That's true. When you do something immoral, it corrupts your character. Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I have not interviewed any sitting politicians politicians. I've interviewed a couple retired, but I interviewed Ron Paul, so I'm not going to attack Ron Paul. He and I agree on 95% of of he and I probably agree 95% on things. So
Yeah, I also
but
interviewed him, you know.
how'd you do with him?
It's great. The guy's got all these truths about this, that, and the other digested, and it was like a 1 hour interview. It was like a piece of cake. I mean, he's got it all. He I interviewed him while he was still a congressman. Um, he he was. I also interviewed his son, Rand Paul, and you could see the difference where the experience, he had everything digested and could, you know, say, state one issue after another clearly and go to the next. It was an easy interview for me. I don't usually have to, interview people that are agree with me. And if you do, my advice is the only thing that I try to do when somebody already agrees with me is try to help explain why they're right more clearly. So, and that also you can do with an individual that you're on an individual level. In fact, I get a lot more joy out of helping someone realize that they're right and they don't know that they are, or they don't know exactly why they are, and it's not explicit in their mind why they're right, so they can defend themselves. So that is something that I like to do.
So, well,
Go ahead.
I've run out of questions for right now. So, if you want to wrap this up by saying anything, or basically restating something that you think is really important, go right ahead.
Well, I just gonna say that I recommend people to watch my interviews on YouTube/Jan Helfeld. That's JANHELFELD. That the best thing they can learn from my interviews is not any specific point on any specific subject, but how to try to incorporate Socratic interviewing into your own life and get away from arguing. Arguing, doesn't really go very far. So that's what I hope. And I'm glad that you identified this very important topic and brought it to my attention to do this podcast, because I've had requests, from people for me to talk more extensively about this. And I hope I did a good job of making the differentiations and persuading people that they should try it. And here's another thing. It's not easy to do Socratic interviewing, and you got to habituate yourself, and nobody is perfect. So for example, somebody says something and I might start arguing with them. That would be a mistake, because I haven't habituated it completely in my character. But whenever I can remember, say, take it easy, Jan Helfeld. This person's saying something that's absolutely ridiculous. What is the right question to ask them? Start with the questions. And when I catch myself, I do that. And I highly recommend that, and try to do it as much as you can.
Even if it's not face to face, even if it's not somebody that you're that you're talking to where you can hear their voice, but it does seem like it would be a good thing even on Twitter or Facebook just to ask questions, instead of assuming what they believe, or I mean, if you're gonna win them over to your side, it probably
Yeah, I totally agree, you know, that the right way to go is to ask the questions. And I'm getting a lot of messages on this streaming thing here. I can't repeat all of them.
Well,
Anyway,
I think
it was great that you brought this up. This is an important topic, and I hope people try to habituate themselves to do this instead of the arguing, which I have found in my life not to really be too effective. So it takes some practice. You got to understand why you believe what you believe, and it isn't easy like arguing. Arguing is easy. This is more sophisticated, but I think more effective.
well, in the future, if you're up to it, I don't know how much you've talked or written or really considered the topic of cognitive dissonance. But if that's something that we could talk about and have a discussion about, I've been looking for somebody to talk to about just that subject. But there are very few people who've ever really given it much consideration. They recognize that it exists, but they haven't looked for why or asked questions as to why or what the cause is. So is that something you've considered in the past?
Well, the whole field of epistemology, which is where cognitive dissonance lies, is a very important field, and I do topics on it sometimes. And you know, if you want to talk about it sometime, I'm happy to talk about it. No problem.
That sounds awesome. We'll do that in the future. So I'm going to sign off right now, and thank you so much for your time. And I promise we'll talk again.
Well, I hope this worked out well, and we'll see about next time. Thanks for your idea and your friendliness. Take
Thank
care.
you very much, Jen.
Take care.
Have a good evening.
Bye bye.